Hey everyone, this is SRT Mikado number 953. It's been a while that we haven't uploaded the Forest Horror Theories and Explain, am I right? Well, today we're now back, and we're going to take a different approach here. We're gonna explain all of the stories, cut down some of the unimportant parts, and then at the end of the video, we will theorize of what is actually happening. The next installment of the Forest Horror is called Smudger and the Magic Mirror. I hope you enjoy.
Once upon a time, there were two little engines who lived on a small railway up in the mountains.
In the beginning of the video, we were then introduced to the little railway of the MSR by the narrator, with Duke being the first engine, and another one that named Smudger. In this AU, Smudger is actually Stanley because he have a American shape. But for those who don't know, Smudger is an American engine that was sent to the MSR during the war. And since his build was very rushed, his trackage did not adjust for the British narrow gauge railway, and this made him oftenly come off the rail and smudge his paint. That's how he got his name. Duke tried to warn him about this, but he just laughed it off. But he did try his best not to cause any trouble, but he just can't. His manager is too neglected about him. But then on one day, the day that he made his infamous event, the manager decided to give Smudger another chance, and if he messed this up, he will turn him into a generator. His job is had to take the slick to Arsdale's yard, and he want no trouble with Smudger. Smudger gladly take the chance. And this time, he did take care of himself. He tried his best to not mess himself up, and there is not a single problem with it. That was until one of the rocks had fallen on the tracks and had bent the rails. Smudgers now knew that his fate was sealed. Duke brought the breakdown crane and the manager with him. The manager was livid, and he had had enough with Smudger. He decided that he would turn Smudger into a generator. Smudger was horrified, and he was begged for mercy, calling Duke to be on his side, but Duke cannot do anything with him as well, so Smudger had no choice but to let fate get him. Smudger get turned into a generator or a steam generator, and he stayed there ever since. The MS are able to gain two new engines to replace Smudger, and that is Stuart and Falcon. And just like how the RWS go, the MSR closed down, Falcons and Stuart went for Scholarly Railway, and Duke was left in the sheds. For Smudger, he asked the manager if there's anyone to buy him, but the manager just said that no one wants him. He'd be left to rot in these old sheds. The manager did not care for Smudger at all, and he left. Smudger had stayed there for many decades. The natives had already invaded the MSR sheds, and all Smudger could do is hope that someone would see him. But then one night, he saw something very strange. A plane seemingly crashed somewhere near the MSR, and it looks like it's from the military. Smudger was surprised. Then, a box fell down from the sky, seemingly from the plane that had crashed. And in that box, something came out of it. A mirror. Then, there is a sound of a footstep nearby. Smudger thought that someone had found him. He tried to call it, but then, another call seemingly from the mirror, and he listened to it. And as he stayed quiet and listened carefully, he heard something that sounds like not human at all. Just then, a familiar E.T. Hawkeye comes in, seemingly trying to find the crash sites of the planes, or a creature. Then, the sound of a roar-like animal can be heard. The sound of the roar and the footstep then slowly turned away. Smudger was dazed and confused of what happened. The mirror told him to be quiet. He tried to talk back to the mirror and asked why he had to stay quiet, but no response come from the mirror. He thought he might have gone crazy. But Smudger decided to give another shot on talking to the mirror, and this time, it did. It asked Smudger if the place is safe, but Smudger told that the MSR had been abandoned for a long time ago. He then tried to question the mirror, but again, it gave no response. Smudger thought that he really is gone crazy, and decided to go for a sleep. But while he was sleeping, something weird happened. The mirror seemingly looked into Smudger's memories.
Active reach.
Please let me out. I don't deserve this.
Smudger then woke up, startled by the dream. He then took a look around, and he saw that he's still dreaming. He don't know where he is until there is a blue light from the distance, saying that he's in the mirror. Smudger is confused, but he then asked the blue light of what it is. But it answered that it was a prisoner. Smudger is even more confused. Until...
We found him. We found our sleeping beauty.
Smudger saw an opportunity for him to get out. He tried to call the men, but the mirror said to be quiet. But not this time. He's not going to let his opportunity to go away. He tried to call them. That was until there is a man coming. He asked the man of what he is doing here and if he was looking for him. He answered that he and his search party came to find an engine called Duke, and he will inform Mr. Norumby to take Smudger too. After the workman left to go and tell Mr. Norumby what he found, the mirror asked of what he was doing. Smudger reassured the mirror that it would be okay. Then, Mr. Norumby showed up. He greeted himself to him and he asked what he could do. He said that he wanted to be on the rails again and he wanted him to take the mirror with him. He agreed and he promised Smudger that it would be clean and given back to him after he was restored. Mr. Norumby left and Smudger waited his answer. Time went by and it was already nighttime. Then Smudger heard that there is another engine coming. Then the engine showed itself and it was Proteus. Proteus tells Smudger that the mirror is not an ordinary mirror. He gave an advice that he should take care of the mirror and have faith. Smudger thanked Proteus but questioned him of how he knew that. But before he could tell, Proteus popped away. In the next scene, Smudger got saved by Mr. Norumby and was sent to Scholarly Railway to be restored. It was almost finished. He took a look around and see how the world around him had changed so much. Just then an engine came into the sheds, and that engine is named Stanley. He greets Smudger, and he greets back. They both have a small conversation with each other, with Smudger telling all of his history. Stanley could understand his feeling. He told the story before he came to Sodor. He used to be a repair train and would go around to fix broken tracks, but it was proven to be too heavy and couldn't fix an old bridges. His old manager considered to scrap him, but then the top of hats came in and bought him instead, and now worked as a shunter or takes goods train. He gave an advice for Smudger that in this railway he don't have anything to worry about, cause if there is a problem about themselves that can't control, there'll always be a chance where they could improve. This made Smudger feel better, but then a whistle blew from the distance. Smudger was impressed and asked Stanley if that was an engine on the billboard. Stanley said no, and the old engine to pull the express is actually Gordon, and that is Flying Scotsman. He explained to Smudger that a few years ago the storm hits the island, and Gordon was one of the engine to repair the line, but then he went missing with Oliver, and there is no sign of him. But then it was finally for Stanley to leave. Stanley said goodbye to Smudger and left. A few minutes have passed, and Mr. Percival had came to visit Smudger. Smudger is a bit anxious because he was known for rough riding, but Mr. Percival had reassured Smudger that there would be no more problems coming out from him. But before Smudger could go back and work on the Scholarly Railway, Mr. Percival asked what his name is. Smudger had decided to put his name back into the past and chose for a new one. And of course, he chose
Stanley.
And so, Stanley was put to work. Stanley then came to meet Scullery. They both have an introduction and a small talk before Scullery told that there is an available siding for him to drop off the goods. So Stanley moved in. He then rolled down the line until he found another engine, and that is none other than Duncan. Stanley asked Duncan where he could drop off the goods. Duncan, of course, being grumpy, Raniers then showed up and told Stanley where he could drop off. Stanley then proceeded to go to the siding. After he dropped off the trucks, he came to meet Fred, and he was surprised to see an engine like him. And just what like everyone do when they came to meet a new person, they introduced themselves. Then a car horn sound. A group of lorries, led by Caroline, had come in to deliver the goods to the military. Fred explained that those lorries just come back from the wreckage sites of the plane crash in the mountains. After that, Stanley continued on with his work. The day went by and it was already nighttime. Stanley had to stay in his sheds with Duncan. Both Stanley and Duncan introduced with each other, but not in a pleasant way. The scenes then cut to the next day with Mr. Norumby driving down the roads. He also had a mirror with him, the same one where he took it from Stanley when he was rescued, and he is returning it.
Why, hello there, my good engine. How are you getting acquainted with your new abode?
Norumby came and visited Stanley, and he asked how his new life going. All Stanley could say is all positive, and he also returned the mirror that he had promised, and he put it on the side of the sheds. After that, he left and wished Stanley for a good day. Second later, his driver came and steamed up Stanley. Stanley then left and go to work. He arrived at Lakeside Station with the scenes that really horrific. Rusty explained that there's a killer running around and had terrorizing throughout the small town. A radio then turned on. The news reporter then told the Lakeside residents to stay in their home under the curfew from 8 o'clock to 6 o'clock. After the news reporters cut, Stanley asked Rusty what time it is, and he think that it was 7 o'clock, and he still have 1 hour left to finish his works. And so, Rusty and Stanley leaves. At night, Stanley is back at the sheds. Both him and the mirror began to have another conversation, and Stanley told everything about the murderer and the wanted poster of the mirror. But then Stanley realized that their conversation just woke Duncan up. Stanley had to lie to Duncan that it was actually only just a tape recorder that looks like the mirror, and Duncan bought it, hesitantly. Then a gunshot was heard from the distance. Duncan thought that they already catched the murderer, and Stanley hoped that it is. It was the third day for Stanley, and both Duncan and Stanley were getting prepared. And on this day, Duncan is more cheerful than usual. He was told that he had to take a tourist train, where he would see a very beautiful scenery. For Stanley, though, it was only just the usual goods. Duncan decided to give an advice for Stanley that if he take crosswind, he would see a full views of the lake. Stanley thanks Duncan for the advice and left for the goods. Duncan shortly followed after his crew arrived. However, he didn't notice that there was two soldiers watching nearby. Stanley then came back with a line of trucks. Once he get there, he realized that there's a group of soldiers storming his sheds. One soldier walked up to Stanley and explained the whole situations.
Oi, what's going on here? We have a search warrant for missing military property. Why would we have it? We received a tip that it was here. But who could have... Duncan.
Later that night, Duncan returned to the sheds, with Stanley already being there. Once he was in his sheds, Stanley asked Duncan of what had happened to the mirror. Duncan answers, however, did not go as Stanley expected. He said that he took it and wanted to record the Valley Rainbow for the project that he was working on. But the problem is, he accidentally dropped it. Stanley was shocked and mortified. So for the rest of the next day, Stanley feels sad that he had lost his first friends. However, at the scene where Stanley had already crossed the bridge, the camera panned to see two soldiers had found something shiny under the water. One soldier then approached to collect it. Time had already passed to the evening, and Stanley had come to Scarlowy's sheds. Scarlowy noticed how Stanley feeling down, so he said to Stanley that they're going to be storytelling in the sheds. And also because Duncan had acting as an ass again. But Stanley was surprised to see who the storyteller is.
Duke?
Duke then came into the sheds, and when he saw Stanley, he seems to have recognized him. But Stanley hid his true identity from Duke by saying that he's just new here. So Duke decided to lay it off. Seconds later, Duncan then come in. He then grumbled to the others that he is starting to get sick of soldiers, complaining about all of the equipments that they brought in just to find a killer. Scarlowy tried to talk some sense into him, but Duncan is still being a humbug. So Duke decided to tell a story that have the same excuses exactly like Duncan. He tells the stories about Smudger, which we just talked about it in the beginning, but this Smudger have the TV series Renier as prop. So I decided to cut it. But the story that Duke told Duncan is actually altered in the end. At the end of Duke's story, he said that Smudger was sold to the mine shaft and was turned into a pumping engine, and it still contained his old behavior. And so, the mine itself collapsed with him buried alive. Of course, Duncan did not believe it and started to talk crap about it, but then he stopped when he saw Stanley's face. The engines asked him if he was okay. He said that it was just only a bad cold and he needed to go and check out. Later, Duncan follows Stanley. Duncan asked Stanley what is going on with himself, and Stanley told him everything. Duncan was shocked to realize that Stanley is actually Smudger, and apologized to him that he has not been a good friend, and he promised that he'll make it up to him, and he left. Stanley has stayed in the work for the night, but while he stayed there, something strange happened. He heard a sound of metal bending or screeching along the rails. He looked to the standard gauge line, and he saw Gordon just rolling down the line, and behind him is Oliver with rust all over.
What on earth?
And after that, a mysterious engine puffed into the view for Stanley.
Mr. Oliver, where have you been?
It's a funny story, Toad. I'll tell you all about it on the way.
The mysterious engine stood there, almost like it already knew that someone is watching her. Then a horn was heard from the distance, and that is when the mysterious engine puffed away. Then the sounds of the diesel engine was heard, and the engine showed himself to be Diesel 10. He asked Stanley if he saw small tank engines in purple colors with the golden headlamps and funnels, and the word written lady on the side tanks. Stanley told him that she just ran away. And so Diesel 10 followed her, with an advice if he saw anything strange, tell him or Mr. Percival. And he left to catch the so-called engine lady. The scene then cuts to the group of police and soldiers trying to catch the murderers, which this whole part, I find that it was not part of the forest horrors. It was just trying to show that the murderer was going to be caught later. So... The scenes cut to the next day with Stanley taking a passenger train. He then approached by Duncan, and he told him that the murderer was finally caught. And he also brought a new recorder for Stanley. Stanley was very grateful for Duncan that he brought something as an apology. But after Duncan's left, Stanley saw a poster that it tells the mirror had already been found. This just made Stanley yet again sad, and he left with his train. However, at night, something strange happened with Duncan. This part is actually called Duncan Gets Spooked. This is the episode where he tried to cross the old iron bridge, but he got spooked by the fireflies forming in the shape of an engine, aka Proteus. But this one took a different turn. Instead of Proteus, the engine that shows up to Duncan is John, an engine from the MSR. After Duncan retreated back to his sheds, Proteus was watching from afar. And...
It would seem that a new hero has arisen.
Stanley was in his shed when he saw a blue figure approaching him. He asked the figure of who she is, and she said that she is the one that is in the mirror. Stanley was surprised and was also happy to see his first friend again. He asked what was the first thing she did when she broke out from the mirror. She answered that the first thing she did is return to her home, but her home was all empty, lifeless, and abandoned. So she returned to Stanley and lived with him because he is the only person that she could talk to and a real friend. And the episode ends with Duncan find out the truth. And now we get to the theorization part. Actually, I changed my mind. Again, cause there's not much of a stories there. But... Remember those people that just found lapis under the water? That was them in the scenes where the soldiers are fighting with. That's probably a friendly fire. Or maybe he was a traitor. But that fight might have caused the mirrors to break and made Lapis break free. And Duncan did mention that the murderer was not announced yet who he is. So maybe we'll see him again. And for Lady? Well, I think it's best if I tell you in the next episode. Maybe the Kildane resignment is most suitable for this explanation. So, I'll see you in the next episode of the Forest Horrors Unexplained Farquhar Siren. Have a good day.